Outlaw Tales of Oklahoma. True stories of the Sooner State's most infamous crooks, culprits, and cutthroats. By Robert Barr Smith. The Battle of Ingalls. Lawman Tom Speed stopped his wagon in front of Pierce's livery stable. He walked inside, threatened the owner and his stable boy with his Winchester, and advised quiet on pain of death. Up the street in Ingalls, Outlaw Bitter Creek Newcomb saw the wagon halt near the livery stable. Ever wary, he decided to investigate. At the same time, he would check on his horse, left for shoeing at Wagner's blacksmith shop. Finding that his mount was ready, he began to walk the horse toward the suspicious wagon. Now Speed, spotting the horseman approaching, asked a passerby, 14-year-old Dell Simmons, the identity of the man. Surprised, the lad blurted out, "Why, that's Bitter Creek." Newcomb heard the exclamation, whirled to see the boy point at him, and yanked his Winchester from its scabbard. Speed immediately pulled down on Newcomb, and his first round smashed Newcomb's rifle and tore into the outlaw's right leg and groin. Badly hurt, his rifle useless, Newcomb wheeled his horse to run, and Speed stepped clear of the building to kill him. In his barren room at the top of the OK Hotel, gang member Arkansas Tom heard the firing. Dashing to the window with his Winchester, he spotted Tom Speed aiming at Bitter Creek Newcomb and put a bullet in the lawman's shoulder. He fired again as Speed staggered toward the cover of his wagon, and the marshal went down in the dusty street, his lungs filling with his own blood. The war had begun too quickly, and the lawmen had been caught out of position. Over on Oak Street, the marshal's men opened up on Newcomb as he galloped for safety, reeling in the saddle. A roar of gunfire erupted from Ransom's saloon as Dynamite Dick, Doolin, Dalton, and Tulsa Jack laid down a barrage to cover their comrade. Young Simmons ducked into Vaughn's saloon to avoid the hail of fire, but as he sprinted out the back door of the bar, a rifle bullet tore into his body. He would not live to see the night. A local salesman, rashly bolting from the back door of the saloon, took a slug in the liver, probably mistaken for the shooter for an outlaw. The bartender wisely forted up with the liquor supply stored in a thick-walled icebox. The town drunk, a man simply named Newland, more or less comatose, apparently missed the whole gunfight. Out in the street, Winchester bullets downed a horse belonging to town resident Neil Murray and disintegrated a chicken that chose the wrong time to cross the street. The town's residents ran for cover, mothers collecting children as the lead flew everywhere. Some citizens huddled under feather beds, others sought shelter in cellars and caves. Dr. Duncan Self's two small boys abandoned their precious marbles in the street and dashed for safety. Their redoubtful father did not, simply walking boldly down the street to his home. "The outlaws knew me," he later said. "So did the marshals, and I had little fear of being shot." Now, Tom Houston led the other lawmen behind the Ash Street buildings to surround the saloon. Marshal Hickson led his men west along both sides of 2nd Street, drew a deep breath, and shouted toward Ransom's saloon. "You are surrounded," he roared. "Surrender." Doolin wasted no words in reply. "Go to hell." Hickson's response was a murderous hail of bullets that ripped through the board walls of the saloon. After the fight, the bartender would count 172 holes in the building. Local sot Newland apparently drowsed on through the whole war. Doolin's gang had been in tight places before, but nothing like this. There could be no staying in the saloon while the lawmen reduced it to splinters. Whatever it cost, the only chance of salvation lay in flight and firepower. They were aided by a citizen, Neil Murray, who tried to draw the lawmen's attention by standing in the saloon door with a Winchester at his shoulder. Murray drew a little more attention than he really wanted. collapsing in the doorway, still alive with 3 slugs in his body. The dueling gang's break for safety was sudden and violent, and apparently the lawmen did not see them bolt from the shed on the south side of the saloon. In the shed, the gang had stashed horses. Doolin and Dynamite Dick desperately threw saddles on the gang's mounts, while Dalton and Tulsa Jack filled the air with bullets. As Tom Houston and his men began to take fire from the stable, they changed position to cover that building. Houston himself ran to a lumber pile behind the stable, intent on cutting off the flight of the outlaws. His whole attention focused on the stable. The move was his death warrant. In the attic of the OK Hotel, Arkansas Tom Jones had knocked shingles from the roof to open a hole that gave him a clear view of the stable. Standing on a chair or some other furniture, Arkansas Tom drove a slug through Houston's guts, and the lawman went down. He would be dead before sunset the next day. By this time, some of the other lawmen realized they were taking fire from a sniper, although they could not locate the source of the fire. They continued to hammer bullets into the stable, trying to head off the gang's escape. Hickson himself was lying in a shallow ditch, drilling Winchester rounds at the muzzle flashes of the outlaws' rifles. Nearby, lawman Ed Masterson squeezed his body behind a little tree, half as thick as he was, while bullets tore limbs and chunks from his fragile shelter. And then Masterson ran to the wagon for more ammunition. Doolin, Dalton, Dynamite Dick, and Tulsa Jack burst from the stable, galloping madly southwest toward a shallow draw the lawman had left uncovered. Hickson promptly nailed Dalton's horse in the jaw, and the animal went mad. Dalton urged the frantic horse on a little further until a round from Leif Shadley's rifle broke the animal's leg. Dalton then left his mount, running toward a barbed wire fence that blocked the gang's escape. Suddenly he stopped, spun around, and ran back toward his horse to snatch from its saddlebags the gang's only set of wire cutters. Lafayette Shadley then left the shelter of a Dr. Call's house, apparently trying to get a better shot at the gang. His coat caught on a wire fence, throwing him forward. A round from Arkansas Tom's deadly Winchester smashed his right hip and glanced up into the right side of his chest. As Shadley went down, Dalton finished cutting the fence, and the gang galloped frantically down the draw and off to the southeast. Every lawman within view blazed away at them, but the range opened quickly, and only one slug hit anybody. At the time, the lawmen thought they had hit Dalton, but would later learn that they had gotten a round into Dynamite Dick, who would survive. Up to now, Arkansas Tom had it all his own way. Now, however, the vengeful lawmen turned their full firepower on the attic of the battered OK Hotel. A torrent of fire ripped and tore at the raw wood structure. One survivor told the story this way. "During a lull," he said, "I was told to go to hotel, that Jones was up there, either wounded or killed. He came to the top of the stairs and says, 'Is that you, Doc?' And I told him it was. Had his Winchester in his hands and revolvers on the bed. I told Tom, 'Come down and surrender.' He says, 'I can't do it, for I won't get justice. I don't want to hurt anyone, but I won't be taken alive.' But he was. For all his tough talk, Arkansas Tom Jones lost heart when he learned that the gang had abandoned him and the enraged lawmen were threatening to dynamite the hotel. He surrendered without a fight early in the afternoon. He was lucky to be alive. The room was in shambles, its walls riddled with rifle slugs, the water pitcher and the mirror shattered. The Battle of Ingalls was over. In Ingalls, the stunned citizens surveyed the battered remains of their town. A few of the more insensitive found time for some crude frontier merriment before the lawman's blood had dried in the dust. Finding the town drunk Newland asleep behind Ransom's bar, They stuffed intestines from the dead chicken down the front of his coveralls and then woke him up. He awoke, still drunk, and shouted, "My God, they shot out my guts." Most townsfolk felt sympathy for the poor drunk, but saw the humor. The Ingalls fight sealed the fate of the Doolin gang and of the town itself. Arkansas Tom was the first to go, duly tried and sentenced to 50 years in prison at Lansing. After years of confinement, he was released, only to return to crime. Hunted for bank robbery, he died in 1924, shot down by law officers in Joplin, Missouri. Not long after sentencing Arkansas Tom, Chief Justice Frank Dale called Marshal Everett Nix into his office and spoke plainly. "Marshal, I have reached the conclusion that the only good outlaw is a dead one. I hope you will instruct your deputies in the future to bring them in dead." That suited the marshals perfectly, and they hunted the Doolin gang over 1,000 square miles. After a train holdup in April 1895, a posse under Chris Madsen flushed the gang from a thicket along the Cimarron River, and a local sheriff got around into Doolin's left foot. In another wild shootout, Madsen's men killed Tulsa Jack Blake and several horses, and shot a finger off Little Bill Radler. Less than a month later, Charlie Pierce and Bitter Creek were killed on the Cimarron by two brothers named Dunn, probably for the reward offered for the outlaws. The Dunns themselves were no strangers to the wrong side of the law. Simultaneously, forgave themselves of a debt of $900 that they owed Bitter Creek. Red Buck Waitman was killed by a posse at his Canadian River hideout in early 1896. Dynamite Dick Clifton lived on the run into autumn of 1897 when a party of marshals cut him down near Chakota, Oklahoma. Dalton, after leading a raid against a Longview, Texas bank, went into hiding near Ardmore, Oklahoma. There, on September 25, 1895, lawmen surprised Dalton, who leapt through a back window and ran. Challenged to halt, he turned and raised his revolver. Deputy Marshal Loss Hart drove a Winchester .44 bullet through his body, and the last of the outlaw Daltons passed into history. Doolin survived into the summer of 1896. On August 25th, returning from a New Mexico refuge to collect his wife and child, he was surprised by Heck Thomas and a posse near Lawton, Oklahoma. As Doolin led his horse along a path in the darkness, Heck Thomas roared, "Halt, Bill!" Doolin reacted instantly, whipped up his Winchester to fire twice at the sound of Thomas's voice, then drew his revolver and snapped several more rounds into the gloom. Heck Thomas pulled down on the outlaw with an 8-gauge shotgun, and Doolin fell, riddled with 20 pieces of buckshot. Doolin was buried in a Stillwater cemetery, a rusty buggy axle his only monument. The local paper commented dryly, "His left leg will get a rest." It was the end of the Wild Bunch, last of the old train-robbing, bank-busting outfits. There would be more outlaws, but the Ingalls fight marked at least the beginning of the end of unrestrained lawlessness, the dawn of more settled times. Ingalls took longer to die. Some of its citizens tried to distance themselves from the town's tarnished reputation, passing resolutions deploring the old bad days. Nevertheless, the press of neighboring towns continued to portray Ingalls as a lawless place, and a certain amount of violence did continue to cloud its reputation. In September 1894, Neil Murray got himself shot in a scuffle with another man, and a monumental Donnybrook was fought in the town streets early the next year. A leading citizen was murdered in late 1895 and before the year was out, a father-son spat ended in another shooting. Worst of all for the town's reputation, a quarrel between church factions led to the dynamiting of the Christian church in the spring of 1901. The kiss of death for Ingalls came, however, when the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe passed by to the south and left Ingalls isolated. The railroad's northbound line bent west to curve around Ingalls, running instead through rival Stillwater. Ingalls' last hope, the Katy line, ran north and south to the east of the town, and Ingalls died on the vine. The infamous OK Hotel departed in 1901, reassembled to become Stillwater's Globe Hotel. By about the time of World War I, even Ingalls' name was gone. The site had a brief reincarnation during the discovery of oil in the area, and in 1921 a post office called Signet appeared on the site. Then Signet too quickly became a wraith. In 1938, some past and present citizens of Ingalls erected a substantial monument to Marshall Speed, Houston, and Shadley. Sadly, a truck later backed into the memorial. Though it has since been repaired, it now stands alone and a bit forlorn, with little but the wind and dust for company.